We know that traditionally that small practices, we are very, kind of that talent in-house is very fragile, right? That system is very, very fragile. We see a lot of chronic turnover, whether it's a couple of years, sometimes even more frequent than that. And it's really hard to run a business when you don't have a stable team.
This is Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast where we ask the question, what does growth in dentistry look like to you? I'm Katie Polson, a dental hygienist and your host. Welcome to another episode of Growth in Dentistry. We are starting our conversation today on the staffing shortages. And before we get started, I wanted to invite you to join our Facebook Dental Intelligence community. Also, if you would be so generous to go and rate and review our podcast, we'd so appreciate it. We read every one of them. Also, we want to hear from you. So if you've got any questions or comments, go to our podcast page at dentalintel.com. And now on to our show today. With me, I am so lucky to have Christine Sison, CEO of Swiss Monkey. From UC Berkeley and a master's in health policy and management from the Harvard School of Public Health. Prior to her work in dentistry, she conducted brain tumors research at UCSF, assisted in the integration of IT into clinics, hospitals, and later led the development of community-wide healthcare systems, including telemedicine efforts, which with your background and what we're going through right now, I could say we have no better person to be talking about some of this stuff today. So welcome onto the show. We're so grateful to have you. So impressive. So impressive. And we were talking earlier, I normally have a co-host and I don't have one today, which is fine because girls rule. We're the best and we don't need no co-host. We're just fine. So
gives me more time to talk. I'm a talker.
Yeah,
so
that's good. That's good. Well, I'm excited to talk about the staffing shortage. And this is the first episode in this series that we're talking about staffing, and it really is become just the more and more, and maybe I'm more focused on it because I've been getting ready for this series, but everywhere I turn, I feel like somebody's struggling with staffing, somebody's hiring, they can't find anybody. And it's the wild, wild west out there, I feel like a little bit. So I'm excited to get this conversations going. So, with your background and with your company at Swiss Monkey, can you address what you think is attributing to the staffing shortage in dentistry right now, and maybe how the pandemic has affected it or what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I think staffing was hard before the pandemic, right? Certain areas definitely felt it more. And what happened during the pandemic, we saw that in certain areas, it just exacerbated an already tough problem, right? And then we had we had the childcare issues. We had people going back to school at different times. We had people that were scared of going back into dentistry. So there's kind of risk aversion leaving the industry. People were coming back kind of different rates and kind of different capacities and mental, kind of a different kind of state of mind. And so I think it was really challenging, not only for obviously people running a dental practice, but also for our employees. And so I think it forced a lot of things from the business owner perspective as a dentist or as the owner to think about how do I kind of how do I continue to practice in this kind of environment? And I think for those that were are part of the dental team, a lot of us, they had a chance to stay at home, right? And so when you're staying at home, a lot of people had a chance to think about kind of that work-life balance, right? And so, time is a zero-sum game. And so part of it is like, hey, is this the right place for me? And we didn't see everyone come back into dentistry. And I think it created, when we were allowed to open, I think it created this kind of interesting opportunity for dentists and owners to invite employees back in kind of a different mindset. And I think the ones that I saw that were really successful in kind of bringing back their teams were those who moved from kind of a really transactional kind of business conversation about, hey, let's just get this practice open. We've been closed for 2 or 3 months. But I think those are really successful in kind of retaining their team members and keeping the team members over time were those that were able to, I think, have a more humanistic approach, right? I think, we're, especially our front lines, we tend to have a disproportionate amount of women and thus tend to also have a lot more children and maybe had to also stay at home and had to carry a little bit of that burden. I think those the practices that were more sensitive to that and were able to kind of have a different tone and understanding of that, I think we're more successful in kind of bringing back their teams, and I think are recovering at a different rate than some of those that were a little bit more kind of, I think, hard when they were coming back. So
yeah, I like that. I like that focus again on team as well. Like if you had built a great team before, it's been a lot easier to come back to, but for sure. Great insight. So one of the services that your company provides is help with recruiting, if I'm not mistaken. So finding qualified candidates has been very difficult for a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people are just making rash hiring choices just to get a warm body in the chair. So what actionable advice can you give to a practice who maybe is struggling to get qualified candidates to apply for even just any of their open positions that they might have?
yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. So I think this understanding that it does take time, right? And I know that's kind of the thing that you don't have. And so what I find for most of my doctors is especially when they're staffing through us, is just kind of an understanding of this is kind of a process, right? And there are things like like a hybrid team that can help to can balance out like things to like, if you need help answering phones, we can do that off site. But I think one, understanding that does take a little bit of time, and sometimes you're going to have to make some on-site changes, right? So you might not be able to schedule as efficiently. One of the things that I think some of my doctors do is that when you're understaffed, if it's for a long period of time, sometimes you can't sustain that level of kind of productivity when you're understaffed. And if they try to, what ends up happening is that there's burnout, right? And then you end up losing people that were already kind of on your team. And so part of it is thinking through like, all right, are we able to kind of get through this process? Because it does take time. Sometimes you think, you hired the right person and they did really well in the interview, and then they came in there and they just underperformed, right? So it's not as kind of easy as we sometimes hope that it is. Sometimes you luck out and it's perfect, but most of the time we're seeing anywhere between 2 to 6 months to fill a position. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to have somebody. You might have someone right away, right? But usually it's a 2-week process. They have to, they're leaving another position, but usually it does take a little time. So I think one, making sure that you give yourself kind of that ample time to be able to see what this is the right fit, and also the training piece. But I think something that's really interesting that I've been kind of learning as well here at Swiss Monkey is that doctors that are also really successful are able to find kind of, and we're gonna get a little fluffy here, it's kind of like organizational alignment and personal purpose, right? And I think even a lot of our team members, when they come into the office, they don't necessarily feel like they're very excited to come to work. And I think the offices that are able to find kind of alignment between what their office does and what a person's kind of individual purpose, I think they find to see much more kind of synergy, and you see kind of an uplift in productivity. People are more likely to report better health. They're 6.5 times more likely to kind of be resilient. They're more likely to go above and beyond. And I think the doctors that can be very savvy about having that conversation tend to do better. Now, that's very soft and fluffy. How do you really do that? But I think there needs to be some kind of deliberate intention in terms of how to learn how to do that, because when you do it well, you do see kind of, I think, much more synergistic practices than those who aren't finding kind of alignment between the organization and their employees' kind of personal purpose.
Yeah, I have not thought about that before. Like how important keeping your current team happy is in your process of finding new staff, right? I've always just been focused on getting the new staff, right? But if you're going to burn them out, and it does take time, right? That's some great insight. Thank you so much for that, because I never thought about that like that before. In a recent article, which I got to read from you, you discussed the hybrid team, which I just want you to talk a lot about. But I've been in dentistry for 15 years, and I can attest to the trepidation that one might feel with like hiring out of like a portion of hiring out a portion of their front office duties, because they just have a lack of control there. So feeling beat. I've also, like here in dental intel, I've had conversations with people feeling like they're being replaced a little bit with technology. And we see that often. And dental intel, with their follow-ups, their patient finder, online scheduling, payments, Modento, all of our tools that help automation. Our intent here is to help the staff, but not replace it, right? So can you speak to what a hybrid team looks like and the value it places on the people in the team?
Yeah, no, I think all of those concerns that you mentioned are very valid concerns, right? I think, and people that are in this space like myself and also with you, and we're talking about it, I think we have to be thoughtful at how we talk about the narrative of a hybrid team, right? Because it's really important because it can be very scary for someone on site. Are you replacing me? Am I not? And I think for us, what we're doing here at Swiss Monkey is thinking about how do we mobilize talent, right? Like if you don't have the talent in-house, can you tap into resources outside of kind of your immediate orbit?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what we're thinking about. Not everything that can be outsourced should be outsourced. Some of the stuff should be kept inside, right? And you don't always need to use this model. There are times where, for example, we have senior treatment coordinators. Now, if you have someone that's really amazing on site, that might not be a good resource for you to outsource. But what happens if that person that's been there for 5 or 10 years all of a sudden gives you a resignation? Then you might be more open to thinking about other ways to be able to overcome kind of that time until you find someone on site. So I think looking at it is not only I think it can be an interim solution, but I think it also minimizes disruption when you have kind of chronic staffing changes. So I think when we're thinking about kind of this hybrid team, we have to think about what does your team need, right? And not everything should be outsourced. So there are things that are kind of that I say, hey, that take up a lot of time that maybe your on-site team doesn't want to do, like insurance verification, right? Insurance aging, things that are taking up a lot of time on the phone, where they can spend that time doing other kind of revenue generating activities, like and providing that really amazing experience to that patient. So I think when we're talking about kind of the hybrid team, our goal here is to think about how do we create a complete team? If you don't have it on site, where are ways, how can we allow you to tap into talent outside of your office so that you have a complete team? And I think even for me, for my own practice, it's such a relief to know that if anything happens on at least my front desk piece, I have something to lean on, right? That can flex with me as I grow or as I contract. If my office is closed for a week and I want someone to answer my phones, I don't have to have my team, be on their cell phones. I can say, hey, Swiss Monkey, can you answer my phones during the week that we're all off, right? So I think it's how you kind of integrate it into your office that is really important. And I think it needs to be a deliberate process in terms of how you talk about it to your on-site team so they don't feel threatened, right? Because there are ways you can drive this model into your office that makes it feel like a very threatening kind of resource. And I think it is imperative upon kind of the owners to talk, to speak about it in a way that makes sense so that the team is welcoming and embracing it, and that they feel like it's something that's going to help them kind of advance the other things that they have to do in the office.
Yeah. I think most people would agree that are in dentistry, the best part about the job is patient care, right? Everybody loves it. Everybody from the front desk to the back office, the most rewarding part about being in dentistry is being able to care for the people that you get to come in contact with. And if, having someone answer your phones for you or insurance verification allows them to be able to give them a better experience, then that's just better patient care, right? But for sure, it definitely has to be a conversation ahead of time. I love what you said there. Yeah, that's really great. Anything else to add? I feel like we're going to get to approaching our last question, which we ask all of our guests, but I just want to make sure that everybody gets an idea of what you guys do at Swiss Monkey and what is available to them. Anything that we didn't touch on.
Yeah, I think here at Swiss Monkey, our goal here is to be able to, again, create a complete team for our doctors. So we are a vertically integrated service. So we provide everything from answering phones to recruiting to hygiene recare to kind of the whole revenue cycle. And so it allows the doctors to kind of have one company to talk to. And that's not right for everybody, but for us, I think it's helpful so that we can kind of see a global perspective of what's happening in the office. So sometimes when you have kind of this orientation towards specialization, right? And you have too many people it becomes very clunky. And I think, especially with dental intel, you are able to provide kind of a global view. And at Swiss Monkey, when we are able to kind of keep things within one company, I can see the whole picture of what's happening. And then we can kind of create strategies that make more sense just because we have the data in front of us, right? And it's not completely fragmented. And that's where I think sometimes creating strategy can be difficult if you don't have all the information in front of you.
Absolutely. We would definitely agree with that, especially being a data company. It's really important to have that information at your fingertips. And I also feel like, not to say that, sometimes I feel like the DSO's space kind of gets thrown out there as the big bad wolf that's coming to get you. But really, to be able to compete as an independent practicing dentist, you're gonna need help, because at this point, it's getting to a point where you have to kind of rise to that same level of service that they're able to give. So
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. Well, we asked the same question again to every guest. And the reason why we ask this is because it can mean different things to everybody. And growth is personal. And again, it just means different things to different people. So what does growth in dentistry look like to you?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this question. So I think for me, a couple of things. So one, I'd like to see the dental industry move. I think we're seeing kind of move towards kind of more data-centric architecture. Obviously, dental intel is a big part of that, right? And I think we don't see that a lot with private practices. And it's really hard to do this because when you're seeing patients every single day, you have to have a very deliberate kind of intention that you are going to start to use data in a more meaningful way. And that's very hard sometimes for small businesses. But I would like to be able to see, I think that's where the future is. I think you can make better decisions if you have the data in front of you. I think that's one, I think one trajectory that I'd like to see, I think, continue to evolve within dentistry is just kind of just the ability to extract data and see data and analyze data faster. And obviously, I think just obviously from our own company's perspective, I'd like to be able to see dentistry mobilize talent better across the ecosystem. So we know that traditionally that small practices, we are very, kind of that talent in-house is very fragile, right? That system is very, very fragile. We see a lot of chronic turnover, whether it's a couple of years, sometimes even more frequent than that. And it's really hard to run a business when you don't have a stable team. You can't invest in it. I mean, when I know for my own practice, if my team is turning over all the time, you don't want to invest in it, right? You're not doing training, you're not doing a lot of coaching. I mean, it's really tough. And so I think if we can allow private practice, particularly, to be able to tap into talent outside of their office and kind of really leverage the ecosystem of what's out there, I think that's kind of the way to go. And it will allow them to compete against kind of these big corporations, which is a bad or good, right? But it allows them to have kind of these DSO-like resources that traditionally weren't really available to them. And it makes then running an organization better, which means if you're not focused on having to stabilize your staff all the time, you can do other things, right? Like be more productive, think about strategy, think about growth, right? And if you're not thinking, and when you have a lot of staff turnover, if all your energy is being invested in how to kind of take a team, it's basically a cost to doing other things. So I'd like to see those two things kind of higher emphasis in the next few years.
Of the staff mobilization idea, I really do. My dad was a dentist. And watching him come, like he would Monday through Thursday, he'd work in the mouth, right? And then on Friday, he'd work in the business. And all Friday, that was his thing. But just even growing up, I could get a pulse on what was going on with the staff in the practice just based off of how he came home that day, right? And so I remember countless times where somebody had quit or resigned or he had to fire somebody. And just watching the toll that it takes as just a practice owner, small business owner, right? That's like all they really want to do is just be in the mouth and just do what they were trained to do. To be able to hand that over, or at least a portion of it, it's a huge thing for a lot of people. So I love that what you guys are doing over there. Yeah, it's really great.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So, well, again, this is the Woman Show. It's been really great. So this has been Growth in Dentistry, a dental intelligence podcast. Special thanks again to our special guest, Christine Sison. You can find her at christine@swissmonkey.io. Link to her will be in our show notes. You can also find those links or any other great information by visiting our webpage at dentalintel.com. Thanks to our marketing department again for all of their work on this podcast. And I'm Katie Holson. Keep growing.